Nazi, to take parts of Israel that are on the Green Line, right on the border, but are heavily populated by Arabs. That's up in the Galilee. It's called the Wadi Ara area, and just forcefully transfer it into some kind of derisory Palestinian state. Of course, the people are strongly opposed, but nobody asks them. That, at the time, was a far-right proposal. It's now in the center. Tzipi Livni, the so-called of opposition, has accepted it. The New York Times has accepted it. It says, it's very forthcoming. Israel will yield land. So a likely outcome is that the U.S. and Israel will agree to what they'll call a land swap, meaning Israel will take anything it wants, anything of value, and the Arab citizens of Israel that are concentrated in that area will be forcibly transferred against their will into some derisory Palestinian entity, which they can call a state or fried chicken. And that'll be welcomed in the West. I think you can predict that. In fact, as I say, it's already been welcomed by the New York Times. So that's a possible outcome. Now, what about settlements, the other big issue? Hillary Clinton did make a strong statement the other day, stronger than usual, in which she said, we oppose any expansion of settlements. That includes new settlements, includes outposts, includes natural growth. Now, natural growth has been the traditional term for expanding the settlement areas. Actually, most of the growth is from immigrants from Israel, but what it's called natural growth. She said, no, none of that. And Israel rejected that. No, we say we have to permit natural growth. We can't prevent people from adding, building a new house in their settlements that we intend to keep and so on. Actually, what you said was not that new. It's quoted from the famous roadmap. The roadmap was presented by a couple of years ago, international, with the U.S. Initiating it, which laid out a series of steps towards political settlement. And among the steps was an end to settlement, including natural growth. So Clinton was, in fact, reiterating what's in the roadmap, which the U.S. had never lived up to, and Israel, incidentally, had instantly rejected with 14 reservations, which eliminated most of the content. So Clinton did reiterate the wording of the roadmap, which is described in the press as a kind of a novel, strong position. But the question, as always, is will the U.S. do anything about it? I mean, they formulated it when the roadmap was produced and repeatedly in the past, and Israel's essentially ignored it. And the U.S. has funded Israel's ignoring of it. I mean, if the U.S. wanted to block further natural growth, it's easy to do, just to withdraw funding. Withdraw funding, in fact, maybe all funding, or at least any funding going into the settlements, all of which are illegal anyway. But even if Israel agreed to this position and lived up to it for the first time, that would still leave the entire settlement project in place. Annexation of the valuable areas, taking over the Jordan Valley, the salients that are cutting through it, Greater Jerusalem, which is where most of the construction is going on now. None of that's even being discussed. So there is a kind of a conflict, but it's not clear that it's any more than terminological.
Okay, thank you.
Here at Sussex, there has been much discussion of boycotting Israeli goods. There has also been talk of an academic boycott. You have expressed objections to this matter. Could you clarify these and perhaps expand on them?
Well, personally, I've never been in favor of academic boycotts, even in the case of South Africa. I don't think it's a good idea. Israeli goods, I think there are forms of what's called BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. There are forms of BDS which I think make good sense. So, for example, a couple of years ago in England, maybe it's still going on, there was an effort to divest from Caterpillar Corporation. Okay, that makes good sense. Caterpillar constructs what amount to weapons of mass destruction. It's these huge, monstrous caterpillar bulldozers that Israel uses to, turn the land into desert, in effect, to destroy towns, villages, olive groves, even kill people, and so on. So yeah, there's no reason why anybody should tolerate, and it's all illegal. It's all criminal activity in occupied territories. So it makes good sense to boycott, divest from Caterpillar or any corporate, British or American, which is providing arms. In fact, at least by American law, that's illegal. They all do it. So boycotting anybody who's involved in the occupation, I think, makes perfect sense. In fact, at least in the U.S., it accords with the U.S. On the other hand, boycotting goods it might make some sense, but why Israel? I mean, the core of the problems in the United States. As long as the U.S. Provides the decisive military, economic, diplomatic, even ideological support for all of this, that's where the problem is. The U.S. has essentially blocked a political settlement for 35 years, with the single exception of that 1 week in Taba. So the right move should be to boycott U.S. goods. Well, nobody's going to do that because you don't irritate the Godfather. Maybe you can go after the Godfather's clients, but not the Godfather. He's immune, so it's not raised. And of course, it would be economically impossible anyway. Too much integration. But that fact, and this extends to a lot of the. I mean, you could say the same about U.S. academic institutions, and they're involved in a lot of things that are much worse than their crucial role in the Israeli occupation. I don't have to run through them. So there is a kind of a sense of hypocrisy behind the BDS movement because of this fact, unless it explicitly targets the institutions and corporations that are directly involved in criminal acts, and anything done in the occupied territories is a criminal act. And that I think is a good program. There are places in one college in the United States, Hampton College, which was in fact the first college back in 1977 to have initiated a South Africa boycott. They just called for, developed a proposal of pretty much this kind, saying Hampshire should divest from U.S. corporations that are involved in any fashion in actions in the occupied territories, meaning criminal actions, almost by definition, so military, Caterpillar, others. And I think something within that framework is meaningful, plausible, and very justifiable. Now, it's worth remembering that BDS is not a principle, it's a tactic. And the question is it a good tactic? Well, some things that you have to evaluate in terms of its consequences. And it's a good tactic if it serves an educational purpose, gets people to understand things, and leads to further action, which can be beneficial. Now, the problem with a very broad BDS proposal is that given its fundamental hypocrisy, omitting the U.S., and Britain, which also supplies military goods to Israel, it's not an educational, it doesn't serve the educational function. It misleads people. It makes them think that the problem is Israel, which it is, but it's also the U.S., Britain, and others who support it. Let's say Germany, which just provided, a couple of years ago, provided submarines, I think nuclear-powered submarines too, I'm not sure of that, to Israel, which allow it to patrol very broadly near Iran. And if Israel attacks Iran, which conceivably it might, it'll probably be using the